Good morning. I see that my viewership now has gone down to maybe 5 because I did an entry and then I had to repost it, which means it wipes out the stats. And then, so there were 3. And then when I reposted it, there were 2 more. But then I got into the stats and I looked to see well, I actually just kind of stumbled upon it, but I found the stats that show how long people have been watching. And those 2 were watched 0.06 seconds, I think it was, or minutes or something, um, which means maybe it just gave me an automatic view when I posted it because I didn't watch it, or it means that somebody checked to see whether I'd reposted the same day and turned out it was the same one and they clicked out. I don't know. Anyway, there's not much viewership for this now, but I'm practicing partly. And today I want to see if I can just speak extemporaneously. I need to develop that ability to just speak about my topic and myself without having a crutch. So up until now, whenever I've given talks or done these video blogs, I've had a crutch, which is to say a show and tell. So I want to see if I can do this without the props. Now, the reason that I reposted yesterday is actually kind of interesting in terms of my research, at least the reincarnation research. And that is that I misinterpreted something that Matthew had written. So as I was reading, I misinterpreted his words to suggest that he was teasing his editor, that his editor was a bore. Well, it doesn't quite make sense. I pretty much can feel that Joseph T. Buckingham took Matthew under his wing when he was 12, 13, 14, as a boy, and mentored him. So what he was actually saying was that some other editor, it was an inside joke, and some other editor was a bore, and they both knew who it was. So he said he accepted, EXCEPTED, accepted all editors as bores except for one. And he says, and he, sir, is not of the galaxy, not of Joseph T. Buckingham's paper, which means that they both knew exactly who he was referring to. Well, it was a sarcastic joke, and I felt that, but I misinterpreted intellectually. I misinterpreted what he was saying and who he was pointing to. That's important. It's come up over and over in my research. And what it means is that I have full emotional and intuitive past life memory, but I'm like a man with almost total amnesia. I don't have intellectual memory, cognitive memory. So I feel something, but then I'm liable to misinterpret it. So whenever I interpret something about Matthew, I've got the emotions, I've got his motivations, his intentions. I know he was making a jab at somebody, for example, but intellectually I'm putting in whatever I've learned through ordinary scholarship. And it's an admixture, so I can be wrong. But usually where I'm wrong, I've got the feelings right, but I'm misinterpreting intellectually. So, of course, it's easy to just throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, oh, he was wrong. See, he's just imagining the whole thing. Well, this is reductionism, to say merely. That word is thrown in there, or implied. He's merely doing this, or he's merely doing that, or near-death experiences, or merely a misfiring of the brain, or reincarnation memories are merely coincidence, or they're merely something that he read in a book. Well, the merely is the problem. And what I'm reminded of is this joke, which I'm now going to try to tell a joke in front of the camera when I'm nervous. But there was a fellow, and I don't know where this joke comes from, but there was a fellow who was known to be a thief. And every day he would ride his bicycle through the checkpoint with a big bag of sand over his shoulder. I'm going to have to get some water. I forgot that. With a big bag of sand over his shoulder, and the guards, knowing he was a thief, would sift through the sand very carefully every single time he came through, and they never found anything. Finally, it turned out he was stealing the bicycles. They weren't looking for that, see? So it's kind of like that with reductionism. They can point to this or that plausible explanation, but the real answer to reductionism is the merely part, which is like the bicycle in the analogy. See? So what I'm going to do is go get myself a glass of water, and then I'll just edit out the part where I've been gone. There we go. Seems like I always forget one thing. I don't know why that is. Even if I have a list to remember, I won't be able to remember the last thing. So I need a checklist if I'm going to do anything that's critical. So what is it that I would want to talk about now? I just wrote a letter to someone, a scholar, who's not really in my area, but I periodically reach out to people just on the off chance, casting my bread upon the waters, or however you'd want to think of it. And I was writing in my own diary recently that it's unlikely that any of these people will take my part or take me seriously. But if I don't try, nothing can happen. Whereas if I try, however unlikely, something could happen. That's about at the level that I'm at. And I've gotten pretty thick-skinned about it because I'm ignored by just about everybody. I mean, here I am talking to maybe two people. It's wild. But like many people, I watched the proceedings yesterday, the impeachment trial. And it struck me that, now I'm liberal, but it struck me that they made a very forceful, logical case about something that was obvious. It's like me trying to prove to you that, I'm dyslexic here, that this chair is behind me, that that's a real chair. Well, I could make a very strong logical case that that's a real chair, but do I need to? Do I really need to, to tell you that that's a chair back there, or is it obvious to you? Well, it's obvious to anybody that Donald Trump is a sociopath, a real honest-to-gosh sociopath to whom lies and the truth are the same thing. He doesn't know the difference. Anything that comes out of his mouth, he makes the truth, see, for that particular moment. That's how he can tell people to go fight, knowing what they're going to interpret that to be, and then tell them to be peaceful. I mean, it means there's no reality to anything he says, see? So it's obvious. It's obvious that the man needs to be prevented from ever holding office again because he's criminally insane. And there needs to be some kind of, ultimately they're going to have some kind of a mental health check before anybody can run for president. They're going to have to do that. I don't know, because that could be really misused badly by the wrong people, but there's a crying need for it, obviously, because democracy actually doesn't work in as much as there are too many ignorant people. Now I'm getting way off topic, but here's some theories that I have that might be of interest to somebody. First of all, in order to get elected, you have to obviously have a majority and you have to have a base. It doesn't matter if that base could be anything, as long as there's enough of them. So somebody figured out that there are enough selfish, ignorant people that you can actually make a base out of that, appeal to those people and get elected. And again, it doesn't matter. It's just quantity. Quality is irrelevant in democracy, right? So somebody started appealing to the lowest common denominator. And that trend progressed over time until you ended up with Donald Trump, But the reason that can work is that about half the people are selfish, self-centered. And this is why no efforts at reform ever go anywhere or ever last. And I'll give you an idea of how I get there, how I derive this. There is a study done by Reader's Digest magazine many years ago where they created a great number of fake wallets, and they put $50 in each of these fake wallets, and they placed them in places where they could be found and where it could be observed. And they made a tally of how many people returned the wallet with the money in it and how many people took the money. And this is a test of what people will do when they think they're getting away with it, when they're quite sure that nobody's looking and they'll never be found out. And that goes to their internal, inwardly directed sense of morality and ethics. How many people had that pole star within themselves that they would do the right thing even if nobody ever knew? And they were looking at small towns and big cities. That was their particular angle. So in certain small towns, more of the people turned the money in. And in bigger cities, more of the people took the money, which makes sense because people without scruples tend to gravitate toward big cities where they can be anonymous. Whereas in a small town, everybody knows you. You know, if you're the guy that doesn't have any scruples, everybody's on the lookout for you because they all know you and they know your parents and they know your grandparents, you know, whatever. Whereas in a big city, you're anonymous and you can fake it. But taking that aside, I have a theory that says that half of the people are inwardly directed and have a sense of morality, and half of them do not, which means that half of the people would do anything, maybe even unspeakable things, if they were sure that they would get away with it. Now, I used to live in Atlanta, Georgia. When they did this test in Atlanta, Georgia, literally half of the people kept the money, which I can believe, having lived in Atlanta, Georgia. Maybe that's unfair, but that was the results. Half the people in Atlanta kept the money and half of them turned it in. Now, take that to politics and social reform. Let us say that any organization you create, if it's an organization of bad people or an organization of good people, if it's altruistic or selfish, whatever it is, gradually over time through a process of social osmosis, it's going to even out 50-50, you know, to where half of the people in there are altruistic and half of the people in there are selfish. This is why you can't make any progress with politics. And this is why you can't make any progress with any kind of, philanthropic or, inspiring type of organization. Because sooner or later, osmosis will cause it to even out. Then you've got saints and sociopaths. You've got the exceptional people on both ends, and they figure into the mix too. If a sociopath gets into an organization, he will destroy it. And I'm not the only person who says that. If a saint gets into an organization or founds an organization, it may, when I say saint in quotes, it may do exceptionally good work for a time. I'm thinking of William Lloyd Garrison and the abolitionist movement in the 19th century. You get somebody like that at the head of an organization, and it can get something done, see? So what we experienced in America was a sociopath actually got control of the entire country, and he almost brought it down. And now you've got a large percentage of people still backing him, even though they know exactly what he is and what he did. And don't let anybody kid you, they know. So it's a very interesting situation, but it's instructive. And you can take that down to micro levels as well. Well, the reception that I've gotten to my project has been really dismal. I wrote to, as you may know, if you've read my blog entries, I've written to, I would say, at least 200 university professors. And the way I do that is I go into the university. I've got it down to a science now because I did this in so many universities. You go to their website. You get a list of them. You go to their website. You go to the departments. You go into the English department or whichever one is relevant. You look for faculty. You go down the bios and you look for the one that has interests that closely align with your own, and then you write them. And I wrote these people individual emails. I started out with a template, but then I said, the heck with this, I'm going to write individual letters. So I wrote like 200 individual letters. I got maybe 10 responses. All of them dismissed me. Some of them were polite. The most I could ever get anybody to dialogue, with one recent exception, was maybe like 2 or 3 exchanges back and forth. I was told things like, with regard to Charles Dickens and A Christmas Carol, I was told things like, we all know that Charles Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol, and that was the end of it. In other words, not a single person will take me seriously. Nobody believes me. And this, despite the fact that I've done 11 years of rigorous research and I've got the evidence. This is what's interesting to me. I was brought up believing that if you build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your door. I don't know who said that. I was brought up believing that if you can prove something, people will acknowledge it. And if they had argued with you, they would apologize. Well, no such thing ever happens. If people disagree with what you have said, they simply ignore you and they stop listening and they stop watching and they stop reading and they push it out of their reality because everybody hates change. Everybody hates to be transformed. Everybody wants to defend themselves, which means defend their view, their worldview. They want to defend their paradigm. Very few people are interested in the truth, and very few people are so much dedicated to the truth that they are willing to experience pain. And pain means cognitive dissonance, which can be panic. You know, if you've been going for years and years on an assumption and it turns out to be wrong, that's like an earthquake. That's like, that's a disaster, and it's terrifying. Well, only the man or woman who is absolutely on fire with dedication to find the truth will put up with that pain, that terror of paradigm shift. And there are very few such people around. Very few. Diogenes with his lamp was looking for one and couldn't find one, see? And Matthew was very fond of Diogenes and identified with him. And so do I. So I've got the evidence. And society, especially Western society, is terribly wrong about a number of things. But one of the things it's wrong about is that it's been fooled by sociopaths. And this is what we find, is that in particular, the sociopaths play a role. Now, symbolically, I would say they represent the principle of Maya, which you find in Hindu teachings, the principle of illusion. And it is illusion that maintains the world, what we believe to be reality, which is our little incubator here. So the little incubator of physical life and the physical world and society and everything is maintained through illusion, through the power of Maya. The power of Maya is to make something seem other than what it is. So the sociopath is the one who has gone in this particular direction of perfecting the element, the archetype of Maya. See? And history, apparently, as we know it, is replete with examples of scholars, society in general, and scholars in particular, being fooled by sociopaths or people who are working their way one incarnation after another toward perfecting the art of being a sociopath. Not all of them are perfect yet. Some of them have a little conscience left. The earmark of a sociopath is that they have brass balls, or what Matthew termed imperturbable sang-froid. In other words, they dare to tell the big lie, the huge lie, the lie that is so big that nobody questions it. Because who would believe that anybody would tell a lie that big? See, so therefore they get away with it. It couldn't be a lie because nobody would have the balls to tell a lie like that. So therefore it's accepted as the truth. Now, among those are St. Paul, who lied about his conversion experience on the road to Damascus, apparently as a way of embedding himself within the Christian community and tearing it apart from the inside. That scam has stood for over 2,000 years now, and it has wreaked havoc, absolutely wreaked havoc on Christianity, which could be something far more powerful. The reason that Christianity has any power at all is because Jesus was God realized. Therefore, Jesus is absolutely present as the living truth, right smack in the middle of reality, and is accessible from any point and any time. That's why Christianity has any power left at all, which it has tremendous power. If one gets associated with Jesus, eventually one gets pulled away from Paul. It's inevitable. I left the heater on. I bet you're probably hearing that. So that's another thing. I actually forgot two things, the water and the heater. Edgar Allan Poe was a sociopath. He did not write The Raven. He stole it. He claimed it after Matthew published it. And I think that he was a critic for the New York Evening Mirror, which was not any great shakes as a literary newspaper. Scholars missed this point entirely. This was a little daily rag, basically, because I've looked through a great number of editions of this thing around that were published around that time, and it's no big deal from the literary point of view. It was no great job that he had as the literary critic for it either, I would say. But certainly as a literary newspaper, it was a daily. And dailies might have a poem here and there. They might have a little story or something. Meanwhile, the publication that Matthew submitted The Raven to under the pseudonym Blank Quarles, and there's lots of reasons why he used that pseudonym, which I won't go into here, that was a brand new monthly literary journal. It was the second edition. I think he probably submitted it as a housewarming gift to the first edition. I think he didn't tell the editor who he was. And it was published in the February 2nd edition. But I'm pretty sure that Poe, as a critic for the Evening News, would have gotten a copy, an advance copy of American Review. Meanwhile, Matthew would have shared that poem with him back in the first half of 1842. So this is 1845. He has a physical copy of this poem. And I would guess that seeing that it was coming out, he thought that he could scoop it. And so he showed the editor of the Evening News his physical copy of it, which he'd tried to get published previously, and convinced the editor that it was really his and that he had permission from the editor of American Review, which he probably did not, to publish it ahead of the American Review in I think it's the January 29, 1845 edition of the Evening Mirror, under his own name. Now, Matthew could not come out and dispute that because he was deeply involved in abolitionist work and the Underground Railroad. If he came out publicly, he would be connected. He would end up exposing all those people connected with the Underground Railroad, and their heads might roll. So it's very dangerous. So he could not. What apparently he tried to do, and I take this from the two correspondence columns. All papers had a two correspondence NTS correspondence column. And Horace Greeley, the editor of the New York Tribune, for which paper Matthew was writing as a star, under the star signature, he must have tried to protest it and expose Poe anonymously, refusing to give his name. Because right at that time, Greeley comes out in the two correspondence column saying that he will not publish anything defamatory for anybody who won't sign it. I'm extrapolating that was Matthew who had anonymously written this thing and sent it to Greeley, and Greeley refused to publish it because he was afraid of being sued. And Poe was had a hair trigger as far as suing people was concerned. So he knew that he would get sued if he published anything like that. That wasn't the only time that the truth started to come out and Poe threatened somebody with a lawsuit. It happened again. So I don't know why I got so far into that. I'm going to be writing an article about that for Real Paranormal Magazine. That will come out probably in the summer, mid-year sometime. And I've got all the evidence in there. And it's a very persuasive article, just like the article that I wrote about Charles Dickens and A Christmas Carol is very persuasive. It's basically like the Trump impeachment trial. It's a done deal. I've got so much evidence. The analogy I use is like running up a score in a football game, 62-3 or whatever it is. It's beyond proof at this point. And the skeptics will say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, but there's an implication in that statement that's never spoken. And the implication is, if you provide the extraordinary evidence for your extraordinary claim, we will applaud. We will agree. We will admit that we were wrong. But see, that's not true. That's a lie. It's a flat out lie. The skeptics have no intentions of admitting they were wrong. They're just banking on the fact that you don't know what you're talking about and you have no evidence. If you actually have evidence and you come up with it, they'll still refuse to admit it. See, so these people do not love the truth. These people are not committed to the truth. They're committed to their own egos and their own worldview. So they have no right to pretend that they're committed to the truth. It's a lie. It's sheer hypocrisy when skeptics say that, imply that if you have extraordinary claims and you come up with extraordinary evidence, we will admit that we were wrong and embrace you and bring you into the fold and all that. No, they won't. So that's the situation I'm in. I've done the research. I've been rigorous. I've got the evidence. I'm presenting the evidence, and yet I'm being ignored. So what do you do in a case like that? You just keep on, and you develop a philosophical attitude, which is, I know I'm doing good work, and they can take it or leave it, and I'll keep presenting it and keep presenting it and keep presenting it until somebody notices that I'm not actually self-delusional. I'm not actually crazy. I'm not actually imagining it. I'm not actually indulging in magical thinking or any of the other explanations that someone in denial might come up with. I've actually got a real case. I've made a real discovery, and I'm presenting it logically, rationally, with good, rigorous research. So we'll see. I keep writing to various experts. I don't hear, or I hear back one or two words. Rupert Sheldrake was gracious enough to write me back a couple lines saying that he didn't have time to look into it. And a few other people of that sort don't have time to look into it. My answer to that is you would have time if you believe me. See, it's a catch-22. If you really understood that what I'm doing is genuine, you would have time. As a matter of fact, you not only have time, you would set everything else aside and sit down, lock the door, turn off your phone, put a no do not disturb sign on the doorknob, and sit down and order pizzas and read my books. If you really believed and understood that what I have accomplished was real. And this is not bragging, this is frustration, but I just keep on, because what I've done is I wrote extremely well in a past life. It was all stolen. I believed that I should keep anonymous, but as a result of keeping anonymous, I was, robbed. And then I reincarnated, found who I was, found myself, and reconstituted my lost legacy. And now I'm going to, having put that legacy back together and created a collection and digitized 2,300 of my previous published works, and having a number of physical examples, having everything digitized, I'm now writing papers, doing blogs, doing podcasts when I can, getting the information out there, and waiting for somebody to take me seriously. And part of the problem is the competition, because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who have sexier looking claims than mine. The difference is they're false, or they can't substantiate them. There's a handful of people that have, a discovery that's actual. And there are hundreds or thousands of people that have fanciful ones. But all of these people are now experts. All of them are on podcasts or have their own podcast. All of them are authors, published authors. All of them have blogs. And you can't tell one from another. So who can tell one from another? Who has the discernment to tell the real one from all of the phonies or the wannabes? We'll call them wannabes. Some of them sincerely believe, in themselves, and they're just wrong. That's all. Some of them know darn well they're pulling the wool over people's eyes. It's a big business now. The New Age business is a big business. Even near-death experiences, now that's a big business. Everybody can have a book, and everybody can be on podcasts and be on TED or TEDx or with their near-death experience. So there's competition there also. So the competition is fierce. And who can discern? The person that's deeply in love with the truth and has been pursuing the truth for years or even lifetimes. That's the only person that can tell the difference. And how many of them are there? Well, Diogenes never found one, apparently. Matthew found a few, a very few. Matthew's wife, Abby, was the one person that really understood him. And she was more advanced than he was. So it's the real, sincere seeker of truth who is on fire for truth, who can recognize that what I've got is truth. Nobody else can. Everybody else goes by opinion. And right now, as society is constructed in our current ignorant, gadget crazy age, because we think we're so advanced because we've got gadgets. But, that's like somebody that, I don't know, I can't think of an example. Somebody that stocks up his kitchen with all of the most wonderful plates and forks and knives and spoons. And he's very proud of how advanced his kitchen is, but he can't cook. Darn, he doesn't have any ingredients and he can't cook, but boy, he has plates and forks and knives. Well, that's what our society is like. We're starving because we have no food, even though we've got great forks and knives and plates and glasses. So I'm really at a handicap now because society is just frankly too ignorant. There are too few people who are on fire with the love of the truth to recognize that what I'm doing is real. So that means I'm aiming at posterity. But if I'm aiming at posterity, how the heck am I going to get my work beyond my physical death? How am I going to preserve it long enough for society to grow up to the point where there are more people, what they call the indigo children or the star seeds or whatever? Basically, there's going to be more spiritually advanced people incarnating pretty soon. They're going to have to be, because otherwise there's going to be no planet. So there will be people in the future that love the truth and recognize that I'm not delusional. This is real. This is actual. But that's going to be after I die. So how do I preserve this? Well, the best way to preserve it, unless I'm donated a huge amount of money for preserving this, because it's going to take a lot. It's going to be some people, at least some people, recognizing that what I've done is actual. So that's what I'm aiming at. However long I have for the rest of this life, I'm now 67. My intention is to keep putting it out there until the right people recognize what I'm doing. And I seriously doubt that I'll ever be popular in this age, in this era, because there aren't enough people capable of it right now, But there have to be enough people recognizing what I'm doing that my work is preserved. So that's my goal. This next edition of Real Paranormal Magazine comes out, as I understand, the end of this month, February 2021. Might be the next month early. They're working on it. It's a fledgling publication. They're just kind of sorting out how to do it. I think they don't have any experts on staff as far as the graphics are concerned. They're learning. And the nice thing about it is it's a completely open paradigm. They're reinventing the wheel, and they're reinventing it differently according to digital media. So for one thing, they have a huge number of contributors in this quarterly e-zine, and the contributors are permitted to write anything they want to with no editorial control at all. They're just picked, and the editor hopes that he picks good people, and then those people are given absolute freedom to write whatever they want. My article was hugely long, but apparently he's accepting it. He said, just make it as long as you need to, Now, the last little bit of business is that I wanted to use close-up shots of the handwritten manuscript, Charles Dickens' handwritten manuscript of A Christmas Carol, which I am convinced, as I said earlier, is actually copied over in 2 or 3 drafts down the line. He copied over Matthew and Abby's manuscript, which Matthew must have given him in Boston in 1842. And then he copied it over verbatim, probably more or less, threw theirs in the fire, so it's gone. And then he started working on his copy and I think he made at least 1 or 2 more drafts from that. This is what he was feverishly working on in his spare time, supposedly, for 6 weeks before he self-published it. Anyway, you'll see all that in my article, but that article explains everything. I've got the evidence in there, the evidence that Charles Dickens couldn't possibly have written it, and the evidence that Matthew and Abby were the original authors. I've got both. It's a very strong article. It's logical. After it's published, about a month after it's published in Real Paranormal Magazine, I have permission to repost it in Academia EDU. That's where non-scholars and scholars can both publish their papers, amazingly. They're keyword searchable and they're made available to people in academia. So a person who is not in academia can make his work keyword searchable for people who are in academia. My first paper about Matthew, which is, I forget the exact title, an overview of the true literary legacy of Matthew Franklin Whittier, which I published a little over a year ago, I think it was. It's been read or seen 97 times so far as of this blog entry. Now, that doesn't mean people read more than the first paragraph or more than the abstract, but it does mean that 97 people, most of whom are probably connected with academia in one way or another, students or teachers, read that. And that thing is, it's radical, because I'm establishing that Matthew was not a fly-by-night literary hack. This was a child prodigy, a literary genius, and I go through what he actually wrote. And I also go through briefly who claimed his work, because since he wrote anonymously, a great many of his pieces and series were falsely claimed by other people. And he was good. He was excellent. He was really a literary genius. And therefore, I consider him as like the dark planet circling the 19th century literary skies. He was the one that nobody figured out. And his work is scattered throughout the known literary history under a bunch of different names. And his work was so good that some of those made those people famous. A Christmas Carol made Charles Dickens famous, I would say, more than anything else he wrote. That's what he's known for. The Raven clearly made Edgar Allan Poe famous. The star-signed reviews and essays in the New York Tribune made Margaret Fuller famous. Those are the ones they concentrate on when there's one or two things she wrote that they like, the feminist pieces. But by and large, when they extol Margaret Fuller, those are the pieces that they point to. 4 poems, at least, by Matthew ended up being claimed and published by the future Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Those are the ones that made her famous, like Lady Geraldine's Courtship. And she writes to her friend that it makes her, I forget how she put it, like she went into kind of a fugue state. It bothered her so much. When she would share her own poetry with the famous literary figures of her day in England, and the only ones they liked, they said, well, that's kind of tedious, but the ones they liked were the ones Matthew wrote that she stole from him. I mean, so his legacy is hidden, scattered amongst all of these other authors, some of whom are still famous, some of whom have been forgotten. And I pulled all of this back together because it was my own work. Now, if that's not interesting, I just don't know what is, It's certainly more interesting than the things that get millions of hits on Facebook. I mean, let's face it. I like to see, kittens playing with big dogs as much as anybody else or whatever, or friends, deer being friends with dogs or whatever. But, they get millions of hits. And what I just described to you, what I've accomplished, gets nothing almost, Well, the interviews that I just had recently with Thanatos TV and, oh gosh, I'm blanking. It's almost like my mind deliberately blanks on me as kind of a cruel trick, See if you can think of this now. I've done a couple interviews and they've gotten, I might put this up as a graphic because I'm just blanking on it. 8,000 views and 2,600 something views, something like that, recently within the last month or so. Well, that's a lot of people. You know how many books I sold as a result of that? 1. And not the one that, The Leak Project, that's the name of it. The Leak Project, which I'd never heard of, but apparently they have a very large viewership. Well, he used the front cover of my book, Reincarnation Can Be Proven, with the comparison photograph of myself and Matthew, which is fairly startling. He used that as the cover image for the video of my interview. And I haven't sold a single copy of that book. It's pretty reasonably priced too. I forget what I charged for it, $7.50 or something, very low. Not a single copy out of 8,000 people viewing that and seeing that image. So I don't think that's lack of interest. It's not that it's not sexy, because that's sexy. I mean, I don't mean in the literal sense, but the comparison picture of me and Matthew with the title Reincarnation Can Be Proven, that's impactful in the marketing sense. I think it scares people. I think and this is what Abby, my wife in the astral realm, has told me. It's not that people just dismiss you, it's that it scares them, and they tell themselves it's boring, or they tell themselves it's nonsense. So what they tell themselves is irrelevant. What's actually happening inside is they're scared shitless. Oh my God, he does look like him, and they check out, and sometimes if they're watching my videos, they may think they're bored. And I'm guessing nobody, maybe one or two people in the 21st century are listening to me right now at the 41-minute mark. I've been holding forth with no props for 41 minutes, so I think I can do it. I bet nobody's watching this, or maybe one or two people. But now, see, I completely lost my train of thought. So I guess I'm not doing as well as I thought I was. But I think they're just scared. It's not that they're bored. They use that as an excuse to tell themselves, oh, this is boring, this is nonsense. The reason that, now this is my feeling, is the reason that nobody takes me seriously is they don't believe me. Abby tells me something different, and we can disagree. It's not just that I make her up in my mind, She says they're scared. They know it's true. They feel it, because truth has a certain feeling to it, a certain vibe to it. And I'm reminded of something that Baba Hari Das, a yogi that I met at a retreat once, said. He said, snakes know heart. Well, that means snakes are sociopaths, and it means they can target people that have conscience. But I think all people recognize the truth. Even if they don't dedicate their lives to the truth, they know it when they see it. And I think people seeing that book cover, they know at some deep level that's real. that's really, this is real, and they check out. And the same goes for Charles Dickens and A Christmas Carol. Those people are invested. They do not want to know that Charles Dickens didn't write A Christmas Carol, because in terms of his popular appeal, I mean, there's Great Expectations and Oliver Twist and things that people have heard of, and maybe they were forced to read it in school. But the only thing they really know about Charles Dickens is that he wrote A Christmas Carol, and that's a very powerful, beautiful, spiritual story. If you take that away from Dickens, his popularity goes like this. Well, what's happening is that a professor named John Bowen has found evidence that Dickens, first of all, did have an affair with a young actress later in his life, which he eloquently and vehemently denied in a very overblown, sappy letter, which scholars call the violated letter, because he sounds like he's been so violated by the accusation. See? Well, it's all bullshit. He did indeed have that affair. But then Professor John Bowen has found correspondence between one of Catherine Dickens' neighbors, this is Dickens' wife, Catherine, and a colleague of his. They were both journalists. And in that correspondence, the friend of Catherine Dickens says that Catherine Dickens told him that Dickens tried to have her put away in an insane asylum, not because she was insane, but to get her out of the way so that he could have his affair. See? Well, an insane asylum in Victorian England was no joke. So he was going to have his faithful wife, who had bore his, I don't know how many children, he has 10 children or something, because she was getting old and overweight or something. And he had fallen in love with this actress who probably looked something like she looked. and she was disposable. He was going to get her put away into a hellhole. This is not a nice guy. This was not a nice guy when he claimed to have written A Christmas Carol, which he never did. All he did was he took somebody else's work and he put his stamp on it, reworked it, and dumbed it down from the spiritual point of view. He took all the deeply spiritual references, which Abby had embedded in it, and he dumbed it down for the public. And then he self-published it under his own name. That's all he's responsible for. He didn't write it. They don't want to know this because there's, just like there's Poe societies, there are Dickens societies. These people have presumably a building which has rent, and they have titles and they have offices and they give talks and lectures and they're important. They're big in the scholarly world, see? If I expose Dickens as having stolen or falsely claimed A Christmas Carol, he's toast. But he's already toast because of what John Bowen has come out with. He's already gone, see, because he's already a scoundrel, So it's just a matter of time before this whole deck of cards, house of cards rather, goes down, And as I've said before, my desire is not only to associate it with its true authors, but to save it from the pit that Charles Dickens is now falling into. Because A Christmas Carol must not be allowed to fall into this pit. And here's the problem. People are going to have two choices, and only two choices. The first choice is to believe that a man who was so cruel and so selfish that he would commit his faithful wife to a Victorian insane asylum to get her out of the way so he could have his affair with a young actress, that he wrote A Christmas Carol. They're either going to have to accept that, which has some very disturbing philosophical and psychological and spiritual implications. If any asshole could write a spiritually inspiring work, which is to say, if good fruit can come from bad trees, we have a serious philosophical problem, an ethical and moral problem. You work it out, but it means there's now no respect for intrinsic morality, intrinsic values, which has already gone to an all-time low in society, in materialistic society. Now it's completely wiped out. Now the medium is the message, I think is the slogan. Now there is really no such thing as spiritual inspiration. Any asshole can fake it. And, there is no real spiritual inspiration. It's all neurons or whatever, see? Or they're going to have to accept that two esoteric Christians, the kind who were burned at the stake or flayed alive or chased out of the country for centuries, the kind who did not embrace the sociopath St. Paul's version of Christianity, those Christians, the ones that were underground for centuries in secret societies, A Christmas Carol was written by those, not by the church-going traditional people, see? So those church-going traditional people who have embraced A Christmas Carol as if it was a religious Christian story combined with a ghost story, where the ghosts are just all fantasy, see, and the real story is either social reform or Christianity. Those people will have to admit they were very badly wrong. And this was not a ghost story at all. It was a story written by two esoteric Christians who deeply believed in what they were writing. And when they opened that story and said that Marley was dead, first of all, and if you don't really understand this, nothing else will make any sense to you. Those were real believers, not only in Christianity, but in earthbound spirits and spirit guides and karma and the life review and the transformation of the heart, and even to things like the vibration, the higher vibration of spirits, of highly evolved spirits, such that if you touch them, your own vibration rate might be raised high enough to where you could actually levitate. See? And remember that Abby was raised Catholic, so she was fully aware of the tradition, the Catholic tradition of the saints and the mystics. But then she also studied other sources too. I've got evidence that shows that she studied the Eastern teachings, and probably that she studied Hermes, and maybe the Kabbalah, and maybe some other things like that. Who knows what all her sources were? But she was a mystic, and she did not limit herself to Christianity. These were the real authors of A Christmas Carol, because she was her teacher in these things. So traditional Christians may be so freaked out by that they would rather believe that a man who tried to throw his faithful wife into an insane asylum in Victorian England so he could go on with his affair, who was a blatant liar and also a plagiarist, they would rather believe that he wrote A Christmas Carol as a ghost story than that esoteric Christians wrote it. We shall see. I'll be interested to see eventually from the astral plane after I die, if not here in this body, to find out which way it goes. I think they would rather have Charles Dickens, the asshole, as the author than esoteric Christians. But we'll see. So I have held forth for a little over 50 minutes. I think that's enough to prove to myself that I can actually do this. I'm going to post this with, one little editorial change, maybe where I went to get my glass of water, and we'll just let it stand. And the number of people watching these is going down and down and down. I think we're at 5, but like I said, a couple of them only watched for maybe 6 seconds or something like that. So they certainly won't be hearing this part. But if you have watched, or if you watch this at some point in the future, thank you so much for watching. These are, when my blog doesn't get read, it's not so difficult to deal with because it's just writing and it's more removed. When I sit in front of a camera and talk to the camera and there's my voice and my image, you're really putting yourself out there. And when people reject you that way, somehow it feels more personal, But I understand, because here's the thing, that feeling of terror when your world is about to come apart, when somebody has told you something that would destroy your entire worldview. And I go back to the best example is a personal one, like somebody that you've trusted turns out to be a scoundrel and be taking advantage of you, and somebody proves it to you. It's terrifying. Your whole world is coming apart at the seams. It's like an inside earthquake. That's a horrible feeling. And I feel it as much as anybody else does. I felt that many times. Even with my research, I've come across things that I had intellectually misinterpreted, and like the mistake I made last time, but bigger than that. And it's unpleasant, but I'm so much dedicated to the truth that I will face anything like that. If anybody came up with absolute evidence that I was not Matthew Franklin Whittier, or that Charles Dickens definitely did write A Christmas Carol, I would have to face it, and I would have to publicly admit it, but nobody can do any such thing. I started researching that case, not when I first found out about Matthew, not even when I first started researching Matthew Franklin Whittier's life. It was a little bit later than that, as I recall, and I didn't know anything about Charles Dickens. I didn't know anything at all about A Christmas Carol or its origin. And I was afraid that the dates wouldn't even line up, that there'd be no possible way Matthew could have met him, or that the thing was published before Matthew even began publishing anything, because at that time I didn't know that Matthew had published anything before 1846. See, I didn't know that he started publishing as a boy of 12 at 1825. Had no idea. I also didn't know that he had previously written things that were very suspiciously like A Christmas Carol. I didn't know any of that stuff. I didn't know that Matthew was personal friends with Oliver Wendell Holmes. who was instrumental in arranging for the welcome dinner for Dickens in Boston. I didn't know any of that stuff. So when I first started researching it, I thought, man, I'm going to find out that this was published. I didn't even know when it was published. That this was published before Matthew ever wrote anything, and that it's impossible. And you know what the first thing I found was? I found that in Dickens' correspondence, there's a 3-volume set, a Pilgrim edition, I think it's called, that's got Dickens' published correspondence. And in there is a letter Dickens wrote to Matthew, and the only thing in Dickens' own handwriting is his signature, and it's thanking Matthew for a letter. So the first thing I found was historical evidence that Matthew had written Dickens personally. That encouraged me. That enabled me to keep going, gave me the self-confidence because I knew there was a contact there. Well, everything I found, just about, not everything, but most of my evidence is in that article that's coming up the end of this month in Real Paranormal Magazine. If you read it there, you'll be getting it hot off the press. Otherwise, you can wait a month or so and it'll be on Academia EDU. Just put my name in there and you'll find me. And if you dare, if you have the guts to let your world shake, you will find that I know what I'm talking about and I've got my evidence. Again, thank you so much for watching.